Beck's 1996 release Odelay is a melting pot of ideas and recording techniques, fusing folk, blues, hip-hop and alternative rock to form one of Beck's finest albums and one of the standout records of the 90s. Sometimes, producers are employed as a second pair of ears or as an organiser in the studio, but other times they can be collaborators and have an integral influence on the sound and direction of a record. This was definitely the case with Beck's second major label release, produced by Michael Simpson and John King, better known as the Dust Brothers. The Dust Brothers had their roots in hip-hop with their own radio show, The Big Beat, at Pomona College radio station. This led to them producing records with Matt Dyke for the Delicious Vinyl label, and in 1989 they had a huge international hit with Tone Loc's Wild Thing. This success wasn't without its controversy though, as Wild Thing featured a Van Halen sample not cleared by the band, which was later settled out of court for $180,000. Their sample-based approach was again the main feature when they teamed up with the Beastie Boys for their difficult second album, Paul's Boutique. Although a retrospective success, at the time, the most notable aspect of the album was its huge sample clearance fees, a whopping $300,000. The brilliant collage of samples ranging from the Beatles to Rolls-Royce was originally going to be a Dust Brothers instrumental album, until the Beastie Boys heard what they were doing and asked if they could rap over it. Beck Hansen had been around on the alternative anti-folk scene of New York and later back in his hometown of LA in the early 90s. In 1994, he surprised his contemporaries and himself with the worldwide hit Loser. Loser was very much hip-hop influenced, featuring Beck rapping the verses to a breakbeat and a slide guitar loop. The album that accompanied it, Mellow Gold, did go platinum, but he was much better known for Loser, so much so that it was regarded as a one-hit wonder, even by his own record label Geffen. After some early sessions with the co-producers of Mellow Gold, Tom Rothrock and Rob Schnapf, proved unfruitful, he decided to abandon these songs as he felt they were too dour. Only the song Ramshackle would survive and go on to feature on Odelay. It was at this point that the Dust Brothers entered the scene. They either met at Geffen or when he showed up at their house in 1994, depending on which Dust Brother you ask. The three then set up in King and Simpson's Silver Lake home. The way things would usually go down is we'd just play him some records, King said. We'd play something that would make us all laugh. A lot of times it wasn't planned, and he would be the one to be like, let's make a song out of this, or can we loop that? The first single from Odelay, Where It's At, is a disjointed rap rock track that features samples that normally would have no business being next to each other. We would listen to stuff and either sample it or get inspired by it, King said. It was all usually pretty ridiculous stuff. We'd be like, God, it's so not cool, that it made us laugh. And then we tried to make a song that was as not cool as the sample we heard. For Where It's At, this meant Lee Dorsey's Get Out of My Life Woman and some dialogue from an obscure sex ed album, among other oddities.
There's no need for violence.
What about those who swing both ways, AC/DCs?
You mean bisexual?
Yeah.
Odelay contained samples, but not as many as Paul's Boutique. According to Simpson, Beck was much more interested in playing the music himself. It was the first time we got to work with someone who could play every instrument. And so often, we'd be playing records for Beck, and he would grab an instrument and either start playing that riff, or riffing on that riff. The result was a much more musical record. Rather than sampling Them's I Can Only Give You Everything on Devil's Haircut, Beck played the guitar riff himself. While Adam Yauch played bass throughout Paul's Boutique, Beck tried his hand at almost every instrument. He could just pick up a sitar or a French horn and make something cool out of it, Simpson said. The guitar riff for Devil's Haircut is not actually a sample. He had this broken 20-watt amp, and we plugged it in and moved the mic around and ran it through one of our little distortion pedals until we got the sound we were looking for. Then we'd record him playing. We had a pretty primitive recording setup back then. I think part of the success of Odelay is the same as Paul's Boutique, because we made those records in a vacuum. I guess with the Beastie Boys, there were expectations for a second record because of the success of the first, but there was still no record label guy telling us what to do. We just got to play and have fun. And I think that's sort of the key. With sampling laws becoming more restrictive by the year, Beck's ability to re-record the samples and inject his own personality onto them was a key ingredient to the overall sound. They did tend to rely on drum loops still though, as they found those 70s drum recordings were just too perfect already. They would sometimes splice them up with different patterns, but the tone and feel was unbeatable for what they were trying to achieve. Plus the added static vinyl noises were a welcome addition to the overall feel of a warm, lo-fi sonic space. The Dust Brothers made use of many different samplers over the years, including the Emax HD, which was the sampler they used for Paul's Boutique, the Akai S900, the EMU SP12, and the Roland S770. However, they did keep going back to the Akai MPC series samplers repeatedly for the sound, workflow and unique feel. Computers were very much in use for arranging the song loops and samples, and the software they used was Studio Vision. This program was cutting edge at the time, although it was anything but efficient. Beck recalls, "There was this old stuffed chair with the springs coming out of it. I remember sitting there for hours just staring at that computer screen, waiting for something to back up." Although John King described the process of working together as Beck, myself in a room having fun, coming up with ideas, and then embellishing and finishing them, making where it's at, also required painstaking attention to detail. We used Studio Vision software and DigiDesign hardware with a 2-channel interface, so we could only record and play back 1 or 2 tracks of live audio at the same time. King said, "I had to take everything that we did and convert it to samples that could then be played back with the sample cell card, and make MIDI notes that corresponded with wherever I wanted the samples to happen." All the songs from Beck's Odelay were tracked on their beloved 24-channel Soundcraft Spirit mixing desk. This was nothing fancy even then, but they loved the sound of it. Many of the tracks on Odelay made use of a collection of old, discarded Moog synths. The only people using Moog synthesizers were Stereolab and a couple of indie bands, Beck said. So you could go to pawn shops and get them for $60. I had a pile of them. I'd bring them in and use it till it broke, then go and get another one. Perhaps most importantly, Beck also embraced their carefree willingness to reject perfectionism in favour of capturing unconventional sounds and loops. It was a refreshing change from their experience working with other artists and bands. Everybody always wanted to play things right, but we don't necessarily want you to play things right. We want you to play things cool. Derelict would incorporate Eastern instrumentation, including a sitar, a tambura, and a suspenseful organ to conjure a haunting, dark landscape. As the Dust Brothers recalled, "You toss an idea his way, and instead of rejecting it, he'll turn it into something fantastic." He looked in the local magazine The Recycler one day and saw a guy in Santa Monica was selling Indian instruments. 2 hours later, he came back with a sitar, a tambura and said, "Let's record something." Lyrically, Beck was well known for using juxtaposed phrases to create unique imagery, and at the same time, the Dust Brothers were keen on placing samples onto tracks that didn't seem like they belonged together, none more so than the opening of The New Pollution. This opening part was found on a self-pressed album by some religious singers. They just thought, wow, this is an awesome sample to start with, even though it was in a completely different key to the rest of the song. Eventually, the time came to present their finished record to Geffen. Although they were really happy with what they had created, they had no idea how it would be received. Their nervousness wasn't helped by one record executive instructing Beck to rip it up and start again, as he believed it would bomb heavily. Beck stood by it though, not least because he'd put so much money into the recording and was financially committed by this stage. That commitment of course paid off, as Odelay surprised everyone by becoming a huge success and earning multiple Grammy nominations. Its creative prowess earned Beck a reputation that would continue into his later albums and rightfully cement his status as one of music's true geniuses.